Abuse runs rampant in our world, but the abuse within the church is often hidden. My name is Ken Fraire, and I will be talking to you today about that abuse that is often kept quiet within the church. And I hope as you listen today that you will be encouraged and empowered to speak out against such abuse. And although I have not been sexually abused by the church, I have been emotionally and verbally abused. And along with that experience, I will be borrowing some article information today to help shed light on this issue. And our main points today are abuse, control, and silence. Starting with abuse. And the example we are using today is Robert Morris and Cindy Clemishire. Robert Morris is now the ex-pastor of Gateway Church in Texas. And on Christmas Day in 1982, Robert Morris sexually abused Cindy Clemishire. He was a traveling evangelist at the time. He was married with one child and stayed at the Clemishire home during his travels. Cindy says, as she recounts this tragic event, not only confirms that it was Christmas Day 1982, but also over the next 4.5 years, Robert has allegedly assaulted her over 100 times. To quote a CWI article entitled "Problem and Solution: The Spiritual Dimension of Clergy Sexual Abuse and Its Impact on Survivors," it describes levels of destruction of sexual assault, saying the following: CPSA, or clergy-perpetrated sexual abuse, is particularly destructive because it is a violation of the most sensitive parts of an individual's identity, the soul, or that which makes a person uniquely human. In an article on NPR.org titled "The Scandal Roiling One of the Nation's Biggest Megachurches Explained," Jacqueline Diaz tells us Robert acknowledged his allegations of inappropriate sexual behavior in a statement that he shared on social media. Later on in the article, we find out that Tom Lane, who was an executive at Gateway Church, said that he did not know the severity or the specifics of the sexual abuse that she experienced, including the fact that Cindy was only 12 years old at the time. And why didn't he know that? Well, it's simply because Robert decided to do what is called controlling the narrative. And that is our next point: control. Controlling the narrative is something that abusers take pride in. They want to control the information flow going in and out of the victim, as well as who the victim talks to, often telling the victims that their family and friends are somehow against them or against God, and to not speak to their family and friends, further isolating them and keeping them controlled within that situation. This is a form of emotional abuse, as it makes the victim feel isolated, it makes them feel alone, and therefore they kind of shut down and they can't any further talk about the situation. In a CWI quote from an article titled "Relationship of Abuse by Religious Authorities to Depression, Religiosity, and Physical Abuse History in a College Sample," we read that victims of clergy sexual abuse can feel betrayed by God Himself and even suffer from forms of PTSD due to the nature of the abuse. And unfortunately, this happens all too often, as soon as someone is abused, the abuser tries to again control the narrative by telling the victim that somehow if they speak out, they are going against God and God will retaliate against them. That is how they control the narrative. But there is one more tool that abusers use now that help keep their victims quiet, which is 3. Point 3 is silence. How do they silence victims? Well, now the church leaders are using what are called NDAs, or non-disclosure agreements. They use these to help hide their guilt and to keep victims silent on the abuse that happened. often with threat of lawsuit or some other fine or retaliation form. In a quote from Will Timmons' article, Abuse, NDAs, and the Church, Making a Covenant with Death, Timmons tells us that when an NDA is used to legally silence an abuse victim, someone who is already relatively mute, both as the weaker party and someone suffering intensely, is even further silenced. To quote a CWI article entitled The Lived Experience of Spiritual Abuse, author David J. Ward explains, you can't admit that you don't believe something that comes out in a publication. You can't have differing views on something that is being said from the platform. If you do, you are in opposition of God. And that is why they use these NDAs, to help keep victims silent, to keep the details squashed, and to keep the abuser looking innocent, and the abused to look like they may be crazy. Thankfully, in Cindy's case, she did not sign an NDA. As a matter of fact, over the last year or so, Cindy has been pressing for legislation starting in Texas called Trey's Law, and that essentially voids NDAs in abuse cases. And since the recording of this video, which is May 3rd, 2025, both Texas and Missouri legislatures unanimously passed Trey's Law, moving this forward, giving victims of abuse the empowerment to speak out. So again, abuse, control, and silence. The abuse is real, the control is strong, but the silence can be broken. And I hope that this empowers you to speak out on abuse as well.